Ed O'Neill spent over a decade embodying Al Bundy, the shoe salesman who hated his job, his life, and sometimes even his family. But what many fans never realized is how much of Ed's own story was hidden inside that character. Over the years, he has opened up about the casting process, the conflicts on set, and the scars left behind by one of television's most controversial sitcoms. The truths he has finally revealed are darker, more personal, and far more tragic than the jokes that once made millions laugh. The birth of a different kind of sitcom. When Married with Children first went into development in the mid-1980s, television was still dominated by polished images of family life. The Cosby Show reigned supreme, portraying an upper-middle-class household that was supportive, moral, and filled with life lessons. It was a template networks were eager to copy. But writers Michael G. Moy and Ron Levitt saw something false in that vision. They believed millions of Americans were living lives that looked nothing like what was on screen. Instead of comfortable houses and heartfelt speeches, there were dead-end jobs, nagging bills, failing marriages, and a deep frustration with the idea that family life was supposed to be perfect. From that idea came their project, bluntly titled, Not the Cosbys. The timing was crucial. Fox had just launched in 1986 and was desperate to differentiate itself from ABC, CBS, and NBC. The established giants had no appetite for controversy, but Fox had nothing to lose. The executives were willing to gamble on a show that might not appeal to everyone as long as it made noise. Moy and Levitt handed them exactly that, a script dripping with sarcasm, crude humor, and biting social commentary. It was not about an ideal family, it was about survival in the trenches of lower-middle-class America, wrapped in laughter that was both uncomfortable and unforgettable. The casting process turned that script into a revolution. Ed O'Neill, a stage-trained actor with limited recognition on television, came in for the role of Al Bundy in 1986. As the story goes, he walked into the room, collapsed into a chair, and let out a weary sigh, a gesture borrowed from one of his relatives. Instantly, the producers knew they had found their Al. O'Neill later said he was seen as the get actor, the only one with experience that gave Fox confidence. But in truth, his performance carried the weary bitterness that became the spine of the show. Katie Sagal transformed Peggy Bundy from lines on a page into a living, breathing character by showing up to her audition in a tight skirt, with teased red hair and a deliberately provocative edge. Christina Applegate was only 15 when she replaced Tina Caspary as Kelly Bundy after the pilot, but her mix of innocence and sly humor cemented her as the face of teenage rebellion on television. David Faustino, just 12, embodied Bud Bundy with a combination of desperation and scheming energy that clicked instantly. Amanda Bears completed the picture as Marcy, the neighbor who became both foil and friend to the family. From the start, the chemistry was undeniable. None of them were stars, except perhaps O'Neill in the eyes of the producers, but together they created something bigger than any one actor. Behind the jokes about shoes, money, and marriage was something sharper, a reflection of the bitterness and disappointments that many families lived with in silence. For O'Neill, those sighs and slumped shoulders weren't only comedy, they were drawn from real life. And that authenticity, buried inside the sarcasm, is what made the Bundys unforgettable. The controversy that shook America. By the late 1980s, Married with Children was already pushing boundaries in ways television had never seen. The crude jokes, the dysfunctional Bundy household, and the unapologetic mockery of social norms made the show a lightning rod for controversy. But nothing compared to what happened in 1989 when the episode Her Cups Runneth Over aired. In the storyline, Al Bundy and Jefferson set out to buy lingerie for their wives, only to stumble into a series of provocative encounters. What seemed like another Bundy misadventure ignited outrage across the country. In Michigan, a woman named Terry Rakolta, who happened to be the sister-in-law of the state's governor, launched a national boycott campaign. She accused the show of corrupting family values, citing the sexual innuendo, the inclusion of a flamboyant gay character, and semi-nude scenes. Rakolta mailed hundreds of letters to corporations demanding they withdraw their sponsorships. Within weeks, major brands like Gillette, Coca-Cola, and Warner Lambert cut ties with the series. For a young network like Fox, losing advertisers was a devastating blow. Executives even pulled an episode titled "I'll See You in Court," which revolved around a lawsuit over a secretly recorded sex tape, from the schedule entirely. Ed O'Neill later reflected on this period, admitting the pressure was overwhelming. Every line, every gesture was suddenly under a microscope. Katey Sagal described it as a time when the cast felt constantly scrutinized. Christina Applegate, still a teenager, was thrust into the role of a sex symbol almost overnight. At just 17, she became the face of the show's controversy, facing public judgment before she was even old enough to vote. Yet the irony was undeniable. The more people protested, the more viewers tuned in. Ratings surged after the boycott, catapulting Married with Children into the national spotlight. What was meant to destroy the series ended up cementing its place in television history. O'Neill would later admit that controversy became part of the brand and part of the burden each cast member had to carry for the rest of their careers. Behind the laughter, scars and tragedies on set. For the millions who tuned in each week, Married with Children looked like pure comedy, but behind the laughter were stories of pain, loss, and deep resentment that left lasting scars. Ed O'Neill has admitted that the environment on set was far from warm. In fact, cast members often described the atmosphere as brutally honest to the point of cruelty. Katey Sagal once said, "You weren't safe. If you turned your back, somebody was going to talk trash about you." Christina Applegate later revealed she had overheard fellow cast members criticizing her through the stage monitor just minutes after leaving the set. These moments weren't just hurt feelings. They reflected the darker side of a production that thrived on sarcasm and cynicism, both on screen and off. Applegate, who was still a teenager when the series began, confessed years later that the pressures of being sexualized on national television triggered a long struggle with anorexia. She kept it hidden, sneaking into bathrooms or even airplane restrooms just to eat in secret. "I was in such a dark space," she admitted, describing how shame and fear haunted her even off-camera. The tragedies didn't stop there. In 1991, Katey Sagal was 7 months pregnant when she suffered a devastating stillbirth. The pregnancy had already been written into the show's storyline, and writers were forced to rewrite the arc into a dream sequence for Al Bundy. Sagal later said it was the hardest period of her life, returning to work and delivering Peggy's sarcastic lines while privately grieving a loss that nearly broke her. Even O'Neill carried his own private frustrations. Physical comedy often left him with minor injuries, and the long filming schedule wore him down. Amanda Bearse, meanwhile, felt sidelined when she and co-star David Garrison were excluded from a TV guide cover featuring only O'Neill and Sagal. The tension eventually grew so sharp that Bearse chose not to invite O'Neill to her wedding in 1993, a wound that neither fully healed. These painful realities revealed that while the Bundys made audiences laugh, their portrayers lived through heartbreak, silent struggles, and broken relationships that no punchline could erase, shocking episodes, and the limits of television. If the cast endured pain behind the cameras, the show itself often walked the razor's edge between groundbreaking satire and outright scandal. Over its 11 seasons, Married with Children tested the boundaries of what American television could show, sometimes paying a steep price. The most infamous case remains Her Cups Runneth Over in 1989, the very episode that sparked Terry Rakolta's boycott. But that wasn't the only time the Bundys pushed too far. Another episode, I'll See You in Court, centered around Al and Peggy discovering that their hotel room antics had been secretly videotaped. The script tackled voyeurism, lawsuits, and sexual humor head-on. Fox deemed it so explicit that it never aired during the show's original run. It wouldn't be seen in full until years later in syndication, by which point it had already become part of the show's legend. Other episodes stirred outrage for their satirical takes on sensitive topics. The Egg and I mocked the animal rights movement, sparking angry letters from activists. No Ma'am introduced Al's Men's Rights Club, a parody of anti-feminist groups, but critics accused the show of promoting sexism. Ed O'Neill would later clarify that the episode was meant to mock extremism on all sides, not endorse any ideology. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, the backlash, these episodes turned into cultural milestones. Fans still quote Al Bundy's improvised one-liners, many of which O'Neill slipped into shoe store or bowling alley scenes on the spot. Guest stars like Sam Kinison electrified episodes, showing how perfectly the right outsider could amplify the show's chaos. For Christina Applegate, however, the controversy had a personal cost. At just 17, she was frequently dressed in provocative outfits that drew enormous attention, though she later revealed the wardrobe was partly her own idea, inspired by the glam metal style of the 1980s. She admitted the scrutiny damaged her self-image. Being labeled a sex symbol before adulthood was not flattering. It was suffocating. These episodes made history by daring to be offensive, but the damage left behind was real. The laughter came at a price, both for the people on screen and the network constantly bracing for the next public outrage. The bitter end and what came after. By 1997, after 11 seasons, the Bundy family had become both iconic and infamous. Yet the end of Married with Children arrived with a cruelty that mirrored its own cynical tone. There was no farewell party, no official announcement, not even a phone call from the producers. Instead, cast members found out the series was canceled in the most impersonal ways imaginable. Ed O'Neill recalled being stopped by fans in Ohio who asked if the show was over. Embarrassed, he had to check with crew members to confirm it was true. Christina Applegate heard the news while driving, shocked to learn of the cancellation from a radio broadcast. For a show that had defined an entire decade of their lives, the silence of its ending was a bitter insult. Despite the abrupt goodbye, the cast moved on to careers that revealed both resilience and tragedy. O'Neill reinvented himself in 2009 as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, earning multiple Emmy nominations and becoming the face of a new generation of television fathers. Katie Sagal transformed into a dramatic powerhouse with Sons of Anarchy, winning a Golden Globe and proving she was far more than Peggy Bundy. Christina Applegate built a respected career, starring in Dead to Me, but her life took a difficult turn in 2021 when she revealed her multiple sclerosis diagnosis. The illness forced her to slow down, and in 2025 she was hospitalized with a kidney infection that left fans deeply concerned. David Faustino chose a quieter path, voicing characters in animated series like The Legend of Korra and Dragons, Race to the Edge, while Amanda Bears found success behind the camera, directing dozens of popular television episodes. Talk of an animated reboot resurfaced in 2022, raising hopes for a reunion. But by 2025, the project was officially scrapped, leaving only memories and reruns to keep the Bundys alive. For O'Neill, who had poured so much of himself into Al Bundy, it was another reminder of television's fleeting loyalty. The laughter had ended, but the weight of those years never left him. Influence and Ed O'Neill's reflections. Nearly 3 decades after its cancellation, Married with Children refuses to fade away. Streaming platforms like Hulu and Peacock have introduced the Bundys to an entirely new generation, many of whom are shocked that a show this raw and fearless existed in the late 1980s. In Australia alone, 2025 numbers showed viewership up over fourfold compared to the previous year. For younger fans, the crude jokes and unapologetic tone feel less like relics of the past and more like the blueprint for every edgy sitcom that followed. The influence is undeniable. Without the Bundys, there may never have been The Simpsons, Family Guy, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Each of those series borrowed from the Bundy formula: satire cloaked in dysfunction, humor sharpened by discomfort. As Katie Sagal once put it, "We broke every mold of the family sitcom." The Bundys were not perfect, but they reflected reality. Ed O'Neill has echoed that sentiment many times. He explained that Al Bundy worked not because audiences loved him, but because they recognized him. Al was bitter, petty, and often cruel. But he was also human, trapped in a job he hated, a life he never imagined, and a world that mocked his every effort. O'Neill admitted that the sigh he gave at his audition, the one that secured him the role, came from watching his own family members beaten down by life. That weary exhale, repeated in countless episodes, wasn't just acting. It was real. For O'Neill, the greatest secret of Married with Children was that behind the insults and slapstick, the show was always about something painful, the crushing disappointment of adulthood. Fans saw comedy, he saw reflection. "We laughed a lot," he once said, "but there was truth in those laughs." That's why people remember it. Even with the canceled reboot in 2025, the Bundys remain alive in reruns, memes, and quotes. What Ed O'Neill revealed is what most fans never figured out. The reason the show endures is not just because it was funny, but because, beneath it all, it was tragically real. The Bundys were never the family America wanted, but maybe they were the family it recognized. Which Bundy moment sticks in your mind the most? Share it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from television's most unforgettable shows.